Hi, I'm Jack Daniels, an ordinary man with a stable job in technology and a family I believed would last forever. I loved my wife, Rachel, so deeply that I could never imagine a day when everything would change. But if you ask me whether I noticed the change right away, whether I sensed the coldness creeping into our relationship, I'd have to admit that I didn't. Rachel and I had been married for 12 years and were blessed with two amazing children. In the beginning, life was truly wonderful. I felt like the luckiest man alive to have Rachel as my wife. She was kind, charming, and had a way of making me feel special every single day. But everything shifted after the birth of our second child. At first, the changes were subtle. Rachel got busier with work, attending late-night meetings and going on sudden business trips. I tried my best to understand the pressure she was facing, but her lack of attention became more apparent. She no longer spent as much time with me or the kids. Her laughter faded, her conversations grew scarce, and some days, she sat silently in a room with vacant eyes, eyes that no longer sparkled with joy like they used to. I convinced myself it was just a rough phase, the kind that all couples go through. But the changes in Rachel didn't stop there. She started avoiding me more. The evenings we used to spend together over dinner, sharing stories about our day, were replaced with silent meals she prepared and left for me and the kids. She went out more often, attending parties or going on those long business trips that didn't quite add up. One evening, as I stood in the kitchen preparing dinner, I heard the front door open. Rachel walked in, looking at me through the glass door with tired eyes. She didn't greet me. Instead, she tossed her handbag onto the table and said flatly, "Eat dinner. I have to go out for a bit." I nodded silently, but deep down, I felt something break. I realized that everything was slowly falling apart. When she left, I was left alone with the dinner I had cooked, eating by myself. In the days that followed, the loneliness grew. Even our children began to avoid her. On nights when Rachel wasn't home, the kids and I would cook, play games, and share happy moments. But whenever she was around, the house became tense, as if her presence drained the warmth from the air. Whenever I asked Rachel about her work, her answers were vague and dismissive. Then one night, as I entered our bedroom, I heard her laughing, a soft, unfamiliar laugh, and the voice of a man I didn't recognize. The realization hit me like a bolt of lightning. Although I wasn't entirely surprised, it still hurt deeply. Weeks later, Rachel finally said the words I dreaded. "David, we need to talk." She didn't call me honey or use any of the affectionate terms she once did. Her tone was cold and distant, as though I were just an acquaintance. "I'm going to start spending my nights with someone else," Rachel said, her voice devoid of emotion. Her eyes met mine, unflinching and unashamed. "You can do whatever you want. I'm going to live my life." Her words didn't shock me, but they pierced my heart. I searched her face for any trace of regret, but there was none. Only indifference. It wasn't abandonment. It was the final end. She walked past me without looking back, leaving me standing there, hollow and defeated. In that moment, one cold thought crossed my mind. If she wanted to live her life, I would do the same. I didn't cry or feel anger when Rachel told me about her new life. Instead, I felt an unsettling silence, the kind that comes when you realize the person you once loved is no longer the same. The house became eerily quiet. Even the children, perhaps sensing their mother's actions, grew distant and quiet. Rachel went out every night, leaving me to take care of the kids, cook dinner, and help with their homework. I tried to bury my feelings of betrayal and carry on. It became a strange survival mechanism, pretending not to notice what was happening around me. But one day, I saw the ultimate blow. Rachel wasn't just distant emotionally, she was now publicly living her new life with another man. Everything I had tried so hard to hold on to in our marriage crumbled. She wasn't just leaving the house for him anymore, she brought him into our home. I had built my life around protecting what I believed was love, but this feeling of betrayal was something I had never imagined. One afternoon, when I returned home, the house was eerily quiet. The dim light from the window cast long shadows across the room. Rachel wasn't there, but I noticed an unfamiliar car parked outside.
My heart sank.
I didn't need to ask anyone. I knew what was happening. As I stepped into the living room, I froze. There she was, laughing with a man I had never seen before. They were sitting on the sofa Rachel and I had shared for years, watching TV and spending quiet evenings together. Now that space belonged to someone else. They were drinking wine and chatting as though they didn't have a care in the world. I just stood there, unable to move or speak. Rachel noticed me standing in the doorway. Her expression didn't change, no surprise, no guilt, nothing. Instead, she looked at me with indifference, as if my presence was irrelevant. "This is Mark," Rachel said calmly, her voice void of emotion. "He'll be staying with me for a few days." Her eyes met mine, steady and cold. The name Mark echoed in my mind like an unwelcome sound. Mark, sitting comfortably on my sofa, kept laughing as though everything was a joke. He stood up, walked over to me, and patted me on the shoulder with a smirk. "I see he's just standing there, welcoming us," Mark said mockingly. The gesture made my stomach turn. I felt humiliated, as though I was nothing more than a shadow in my own home. My fists clenched at my sides, my eyes burning with anger, but I didn't speak. I stood there in silence, swallowing the rising contempt in my heart. Rachel remained seated, completely detached. She didn't look at me, didn't explain, didn't apologize. She continued her conversation with Mark, laughing as if I didn't exist. The room felt suffocating, filled with a cold indifference that shattered everything we had once shared. I left the living room without a word. The pain, the betrayal, it wasn't shocking anymore. Instead, it was an awakening. I realized that in Rachel's eyes, I no longer mattered. I was no longer the man she loved. She had chosen her path, leaving me behind with the kids and a house full of memories that now felt hollow. The sense of loss burned slowly within me, not from sadness, but from a deep sense of humiliation. Everything I once cherished had been tainted. As I looked around at the familiar things in the house, the furniture, the pictures, the little details that once told the story of our life together, I realized they no longer held any meaning. But instead of despair, I felt a strange calmness settle over me. I no longer saw myself as the victim in this story. I was the only one who could decide what would happen next. In that moment, I made a decision. I wouldn't let this betrayal define me. I wouldn't let Rachel and Mark's actions strip me of my dignity. I would act, though I didn't yet know how. It took me a long time to steady my breathing after that moment. The humiliation, the deception, they felt like waves pulling me into darkness. While Rachel and Mark laughed downstairs, I stood upstairs, looking out of the window, my heart heavy yet eerily calm. Rachel had betrayed me, not just physically, but emotionally. She made no effort to hide it, not even the slightest trace of shame. What she called freedom, I saw as cruelty and disrespect. I realized that I couldn't change anything about our relationship anymore. It was over. But I decided one thing: I wouldn't let Rachel and her lover continue to disrespect me. I was tired of living in the shadow of a broken marriage. And that night, I made up my mind that I couldn't sleep that night. I paced back and forth in my room, thinking through every step, every plan. Everything had to be done carefully because I knew that once I made a decision, there would be no turning back. I thought about Rachel, about everything she had done, and the words she had said. A coldness settled over me, chilling and unshakable. Rachel thought I didn't know that I was too weak to act. She believed I was a coward. That was her biggest mistake. I wasn't the man she thought I was. I had listened to her excuses, endured her contemptuous looks, and tolerated the humiliation of seeing her bring Mark into our home. I had stayed silent for too long. But now, I had reached my limit. At that moment, I asked myself, if I didn't act, could I live with myself? Could I continue to endure the lies and betrayal? The answer was clear: no. I couldn't. When I finally decided to act, everything became simpler. The pain I once felt faded into a calm determination. What I needed now was justice, an ending. And I would create that ending in a way no one could have predicted. One night, I stood outside the living room door, listening to Rachel and Mark's laughter. From the other side, Their voices sounded carefree, as if nothing was wrong. To me, it was nothing but a mockery. I grabbed Mark's car keys from the counter and walked silently out to his car. The cool night air pressed against my skin, but I felt nothing. When I returned, I knew I had set everything in motion. It was the first step in my plan, ensuring they wouldn't move freely anymore. This wasn't just revenge, it was liberation. It wasn't just about punishing Rachel and Mark, but freeing myself from the suffocating life I'd been forced to live. When I finally stood before them, their clueless faces staring back at me, I felt nothing but calm. The anger, the pain, it was gone. I was no longer the man left behind. That night, I worked in silence. I made sure my steps were quick and precise. The sounds from the room below weren't laughter or mockery anymore. They were just faint murmurs, reminders that an ending was coming. I didn't act out of anger. I acted for peace. This wasn't blind revenge. It was the final protection of myself, my family, and everything I had once loved and trusted. When it was all done, I didn't feel relief. I felt only the weight of finality, that I had done what needed to be done. The sleepless nights spent lying in bed, trapped by thoughts of the past and the future, no longer mattered. I had let everything go. The next morning, as the first light of dawn crept into the room, I stood before the mirror. I didn't see anger or pain anymore. I saw a man who had faced his greatest fear, betrayal, and had overcome it. I had no regrets about my decision. Rachel and Mark were tied up in the house we once called home. I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I would. Not because I regretted my actions, but because I no longer felt anything. The whole ordeal had been too easy, too quick. What I thought would feel like closure now felt like an empty silence. Rachel didn't have a chance to resist. Both she and Mark had been caught off guard when I walked into the room. Their terror was unmistakable when they realized what was happening. But I didn't give them a chance to explain, to beg, or to lie. I didn't need their excuses or apologies anymore. They had crossed a line that couldn't be undone. Both of them were tightly bound, struggling against their restraints. Rachel's eyes burned with anger, but I saw fear beneath it. Mark, on the other hand, looked at me with calculation, as if searching for a way out. But I was ready. They weren't going anywhere. When I looked into Rachel's eyes for the last time, I realized something profound. It wasn't hatred that I felt. It wasn't the blind desire for revenge. It was clarity. In that moment, I knew I no longer loved her. The memories of us, the laughter, the happiness we once shared, they were nothing but faint echoes now, fragments of a life that no longer existed. Rachel had gone too far, and the person I once loved was gone. She had destroyed everything we built together, and now, I was here to end the story she had started. I didn't need to hear her say anything. I didn't care for apologies, explanations, or pleas. They would mean nothing. I wasn't the same man anymore. She had abandoned me, left the family, left everything we once had. I stepped out of the room and into the garage to grab the old shovel I had prepared. A few minutes later, I began doing things no one could have expected. I opened the septic tank, a job I hated, but now, it had become crucial to my plan. When I returned to Rachel and Mark, I no longer saw them as the people I once called family. They were no longer individuals I could recognize. All I saw were two traitors, no longer worthy of any mercy. I didn't feel joy or satisfaction when I brought them to this final place. I only felt relief, a relief that it was finally over. I didn't act out of anger, but out of fairness. Everything had to end, the lies, the betrayal. It all had to stop, and I knew I had done the right thing. I wasn't just protecting myself. I was protecting my children from the chaos Rachel had created. With the shovel in my hand, I continued my work in silence. No screams, no pleas. All I heard was the crunching of clay and the quiet of the dark night. They were gone, and peace filled the house once more. I continued until everything was back to normal, until there were no traces of them left. When I stepped outside, the sky was still dark, devoid of stars. I knew I had succeeded. No one would ever know what I had done that night. No one would discover the truth. I had protected the peace of my life. I stood before the mirror again, and this time, There was no unease, no pain. Just peace, a sense of tranquility I had never felt before. I had no regrets. When everything was finished, I entered the house quietly, as if nothing special had happened. I didn't do this for satisfaction or blind revenge. I felt that I had finally ended a long string of suffering. When the kids came home, they saw me as usual, the steady father who had kept the house together all these years. That evening, I made dinner for them. They didn't ask about their mother. They didn't seek an explanation. They were too young to understand what had happened, but they could feel something was different in the air. They didn't know the truth, but they felt peace. They felt safe, something I had worked so hard to maintain all these years. That evening, my mother called, asking about my mood and the past few days. I simply told her I was fine, that I had a peaceful time. She didn't ask any more questions. She just said she would visit us over the weekend, as usual. I didn't feel the need to tell her the truth. She would never understand, and I didn't expect her to. A few weeks later, I received a call from the police. They asked about Rachel's disappearance. They spoke with a searching tone, but all I could do was answer that I didn't know where she was. Rachel had left the family, and that was all I told them. They asked about her friends, her relationships, but I only gave vague answers, offering no further information. I remember clearly when they said they would continue looking, that they would try their best to figure out where she might be. I simply smiled lightly. I didn't need to explain anything. The police left, and I didn't have to face any suspicion. A few months later, they returned with their conclusion. Based on their investigation, they believed Rachel had left everything behind and run off with her new lover. Again, I just nodded. I didn't feel any emotion when I heard those words. A sense of calmness enveloped me. Rachel was no longer a part of my life, and that was how the story ended. No one asked about Rachel anymore. My children, though they occasionally asked about their mother, had learned to accept her absence. No sadness, no feeling of lack, just me and them, living a normal life as if nothing had happened. Everything was done. I had erased everything that belonged to her, from the things in the house to the gifts she had given me. Everything was gone, leaving no trace behind. The house was now just mine and the kids, a place without the ghosts of betrayal. I didn't need to explain anything to anyone. I didn't need to justify what I had done. Everything was over, and I had achieved my goal. No more pain, no more waiting. The story had closed, and I could finally live my life without the burden of painful memories. Looking back now, I realize that sometimes in life, we need to end what no longer belongs to us. Betrayal can break a heart, but forgiveness and letting go can help us find peace in our soul. And that, I think, is the lesson that I have learned: not to let the past haunt me, not to let those who have left cause me to lose the beautiful life I still have. Liberation isn't about revenge. It's about finding yourself again and focusing on what truly matters. Time passed, and my life gradually returned to its course. I no longer felt the absence of Rachel, though the children sometimes asked about their mother. They, too, had slowly gotten used to her absence. I took care of them, taught them, and together we rebuilt our lives, step by step. I knew they didn't need to live in the shadow of the past. They didn't need to know the details of what had happened. What they needed was a strong and loving father, and that was what I had become. I began to find joy in my work again. The technology projects I had once immersed myself in became a source of inspiration again, a reason to wake up each morning without that empty feeling. I was no longer haunted by the past. I no longer blamed myself or felt guilty for what had happened. I had learned to let go. One morning, while cleaning the garage and pulling out some old things, I happened to find an old photo of Rachel and me. We were smiling, looking at each other with loving eyes on our wedding day. I paused for a moment, looking at the photo, and felt something shift within me. It wasn't pain or regret. It was understanding and acceptance. Rachel was no longer a part of my life. She had chosen her path, and so had I. We couldn't change the past, but I could build a future for myself and my children. No regrets, no nostalgia, only maturity and peace. I learned that not everything in life goes as we expect, but it's precisely in those difficult moments that we find our inner strength. We must learn to let go of what no longer belongs to us and rediscover who we are. Most importantly, we must live for those we love, for those who need us. When my little son looked at me with innocent, happy eyes and said, "Dad, I love you so much," I couldn't help but feel a touch of emotion. Everything I had done, everything I had gone through, was all worth it for my children. I wouldn't let the old pain steal my joy in life. I would live to protect what I hold most dear. And finally, I realized that the most important thing in life is not to hold on to what's gone, but to know when to let go, to keep moving forward, to keep loving, and to truly live. Reflection. If you found this story meaningful, please give it a like and subscribe. Your support keeps me going and inspires me to create more content like this. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share your feelings in the comments below. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and I'll see you in the next one.